After a long and tiring journey, Sarah and Mark finally arrived at the house they had rented for their vacation, and the tension they had been feeling had eased a little. The cottage was in an ideal location, away from the hustle and bustle of the city, and offered a sense of solitude. The photos of the house were even more charming and beautiful than what they had seen online. With its stone walls, wooden shutters, and flower-adorned porch, it had the feel of a true country home. However, an odd silence permeated the house and its surroundings. As they unloaded their luggage from the trunk and made their way toward the front door, Sarah paused for a moment. "There's an odd energy here, Mark," she said. "Don't be silly, Sarah. You're just tired. We've had a long journey. Let's go inside and rest a bit," he replied. When they opened the door, Sarah and Mark were greeted by the scent of old wood. Antique furniture, lace curtains, and oil paintings on the walls gave the house a nostalgic feel. Sarah noticed something odd about the house's decor. The three paintings above the fireplace in the living room were crooked. These were old paintings depicting rural landscapes. "Why are these paintings crooked?" Sarah asked, approaching the paintings with curiosity. "Maybe the wall is crooked," Mark said, not seeming to care much. Sarah tried to straighten the paintings, but no matter how hard she tried, they would tilt again shortly afterward. "It's strange, as if something is constantly pulling them down," Sarah said. Mark laughed at her words. "Don't exaggerate, Sarah. It's just an old house. Not everything has to be perfect," he said, trying to reassure her. However, Sarah's uneasiness wouldn't go away. It was as if there was a secret hidden in the walls of the house, and this secret wouldn't leave her alone. As the night progressed, Sarah had trouble sleeping. She heard faint tapping and whispering coming from the walls. It sounded as if there were people behind the walls. While Mark snored in his sleep, Sarah turned to him. "Mark, do you hear those strange sounds?" Mark opened his eyes sleepily. "What sounds?" "Don't be silly, Sarah. You're just dreaming," he mumbled and closed his eyes again. When Sarah woke up in the morning, she claimed that the noises she had heard during the night had increased and that they seemed to be coming from inside the walls. Mark was disturbed by this conversation, but he still tried to offer a logical explanation. "Maybe there are mice, Sarah, or insects. We're in the countryside. These things are normal," he said, continuing to try to calm her down, but Mark was also confused. After breakfast, Sarah noticed that the painting on the wall had warped again. This time, Mark also began to suspect something was amiss and was more careful as he straightened the painting. However, it warped again shortly afterward. "There's something odd about this," Mark said, furrowing his brow. "This painting doesn't warp on its own." Sarah shook her head. "I think so too," she said. They decided to explore the house. After a few hours, they were exhausted, but hadn't found anything yet. Just as they were about to give up, Sarah's eye caught a painting on the wall. It was something they hadn't noticed before. The painting was hanging higher than the others and seemed to be hiding something beneath it. Mark climbed onto a chair, took down the painting, and found a small hole in the wall behind it. The hole was so small that it would normally be impossible to notice. Sarah approached the hole with fear and pressed her eye against it. She was horrified by what she saw. The hole led to another room in the house, but this room was not a normal room. It was like a surveillance room. Mark also experienced the same shock when he looked into the hole. In the small room, There was an old table, a chair, and a series of electronic devices. On the table, there were hidden cameras, recording devices, and complex cables. All of this clearly indicated that someone was watching them. Sarah whispered, "Cameras?" Her voice trembling. "They're watching us." Mark clenched his fist in anger. Who are they? Why are they doing this? They didn't know the answers, but one thing was certain. This place was far more dangerous than they had imagined. They wanted to break through the wall to enter the room. After searching around a little more, they found a secret door behind the bookcase. The passage to the room was narrow and dark. When they entered, the smell of mold stung their nostrils. The secret room was larger than they had expected. There were other holes in the walls leading to different rooms in the house. It was as if every corner of the house could be monitored from this room. Mark began to examine the recording devices on the table. The devices were recording continuously. Sarah began to listen to the recordings. The recordings contained their own voices, conversations, and movements. Everything had been recorded in minute detail. Soon, their fear turned into intense anger. Someone had recorded their most private moments, trampling on their privacy. Sarah said, "We won't let whoever did this get away with it," her voice trembling with anger. "We'll go to the police and report them." Mark agreed. However, they needed to gather evidence first. They tried to copy the recordings, but the devices were encrypted. They tried to crack the code, but failed. Hours had passed, and it was starting to get dark. Sarah said, "We can't wait until morning to go to the police," her voice trembling with anger. "I can't stand staying here another night." Mark shook his head in concern. "You're right, but first, we should try to contact the landlord. Maybe they have an explanation." They found the landlord's phone number online and called. The phone rang, but no one answered. They called repeatedly, left messages, but to no avail. The landlord had vanished. They decided to go to the police. However, the house was in a remote area. Sarah called the police, but the line suddenly cut off. This situation greatly increased their fears. They wanted to escape from this house immediately. They entered the room to gather their belongings and locked the door. A little later, there was a noise from downstairs. It sounded like a plate breaking. Mark quickly dropped the clothes he was holding and turned to Sarah. "Something's happening," he said. "We need to hide immediately." Sarah also panicked and dropped what she was holding. They didn't know what to do. There was no safe place to hide inside the house. Mark said, "Let's go up to the roof. Maybe we can escape from there." They quickly left the bedroom and headed for the stairs. The sounds coming from below were growing louder and getting closer. Mark opened the door at the top of the stairs leading to the roof, and they went outside. The roof was cold and dark. The wind was blowing hard. Mark said, "We can't jump from here. It's too high." Sarah asked, "Then what will we do?" "Will we hide here?" Mark replied, "No. We'll fight. We need to show those watching us that we're not easy prey." At that moment, a strength emerged within Sarah. Fear had given way to determination. Together, they would escape this nightmare. No matter what happened, they wouldn't give up. They went back inside the house. When they looked down the stairs, there was a long stretch of darkness. The tension in the house was growing. As Sarah and Mark thought about their next move, they could feel the homeowner's whisper and shadow. Suddenly, the power went out, and the house was plunged into darkness. Sarah let out a small scream and gripped Mark's hand tightly. "What happened?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark said, "The fuse might have blown," but his voice didn't sound convinced. Deep down, he knew it wasn't a fuse malfunction. The landlord had sprung into action. Mark turned on the flashlight on his cell phone and went downstairs to check the fuse box. Sarah hid in the room, her heart racing. Every second felt like an eternity. Sarah jumped at the noise coming from downstairs. It sounded like something had fallen over. "Mark!" she called out, but there was no response. She couldn't wait any longer. She took the knife she had found earlier in the kitchen from the table and, with trembling hands, reached for the door and opened it. She looked down the stairs. It was completely dark below. "Mark, can you hear me?" she called again, this time louder and more determined. The only thing coming from below was a deep silence. Sarah began to descend the stairs. With each step, the creaking of the stairs echoed through the house. When she reached the bottom, she saw that the kitchen door was open. A faint light was coming from inside. As she approached the kitchen, she saw Mark lying on the floor. He had been knocked unconscious by a blow to the head. Sarah ran helplessly and placed Mark's head on her knees, saying, "Mark, wake up. Mark, please wake up." Mark was unconscious. Sarah gathered herself, unsure of what to do. She looked around, but it was very dark. The homeowner was inside the house and had incapacitated Mark. Now it was her turn. Just then she heard a whisper behind her. "You're not alone." Sarah quickly turned around. She saw the homeowner standing before her. His face was shrouded in shadows, but she could make out the expression in his eyes, obsession and madness. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. "You," she whispered, her voice a mix of shock and fear. "Yes, it's me," the homeowner said, his voice cold and resolute. "I've been watching you for a long time. A young, loving couple like you had to be in my house, with me." Sarah raised the knife toward him. "Stay away from me." The homeowner laughed loudly. "Do you think you can stop me with that knife? I planned for you to take the knife. Everything is under my control." The homeowner pulled a gun from his waist. Sarah froze in horror. "I'm sorry, Sarah," said the homeowner, "but this had to be done." The homeowner aimed the gun at Sarah. Sarah closed her eyes and thought of Mark one last time. The gun fired. A few days later, the rented house in the countryside was as quiet and peaceful as ever. The sun shone through the windows, illuminating the dust particles. The homeowner had hidden Sarah and Mark's lifeless bodies behind the walls of the house. The secret passages and rooms were the perfect place to keep the house's dark secrets. He had disposed of the evidence, cleaned everything up, and left the house as if nothing had ever happened. Sarah and Mark's spirits were trapped in the house forever. The rental house was not the end of a nightmare, but merely the beginning of the next one.